The letter. It all began with a plain white envelope left in the mailbox. At first glance, it looked routine, just another piece of HOA correspondence full of reminders about lawn care and trash bin etiquette. But tucked inside was a single-page notice that would set off a chain of events no one in the neighborhood could have predicted. The HOA had decided my backyard pool was a violation of community standards and demanded its immediate removal. According to them, it clashed with the so-called aesthetic values of the subdivision. The letter gave me 30 days to comply, threatening daily fines of $200 if I failed to act. The language was cold, sterile, and absolute. It was as if someone on the board, most likely a certain power-hungry neighbor with too much time on their hands, had been waiting for this opportunity to flex authority. My pool wasn't some neglected eyesore. It was a clean, well-maintained place for my family to cool off during the summer heat. But the HOA had spoken, and their word, at least in their eyes, was law. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was a mistake or a misunderstanding. I reviewed the community guidelines, line by line. Nowhere was there any explicit rule banning pools. The closest clause mentioned unsightly water features, clearly intended to prevent half-dug ponds or abandoned fountains from turning into mosquito havens. My pool was the opposite of unsightly. It was the pride of my backyard. But the HOA had decided to interpret the rules however they pleased. Within days, rumors began to circulate. Neighbors whispered that the HOA president, a notoriously controlling woman who relished handing out fines, had personally flagged my pool as a problem. She claimed it reduced property values and set a bad precedent. Others suspected she was simply jealous, since her own yard was too small for a pool. Either way, the decision had been made, and I was left staring at a ticking clock counting down the days until demolition. The weight of the situation sank in slowly. Removing the pool wasn't just about losing a luxury. It was about surrendering to unreasonable control. It meant tearing apart a part of my home, spending thousands of dollars, and watching years of enjoyment vanish because someone behind a desk decided they didn't like it. The anger started to build, mixing with a creeping sense of helplessness. Every time I looked out at the shimmering water in the sun, I felt that frustration tighten. But anger, when bottled, has a way of transforming into determination. If the HOA thought they could bully me into submission, they were about to learn otherwise. I wasn't just going to resist, I was going to outsmart them. What started as a demand to remove my pool would soon become the seed of a plan that no one, not even the most controlling HOA board, could stop. The 30 days were counting down, and instead of panicking, I was plotting. And that was the moment the idea of turning the pool into something entirely different began to take shape. The spark of revenge. The letter sat on my desk like a constant reminder of the battle ahead. Every time I glanced at it, the bold words, "remove the pool," seemed to taunt me. The HOA expected me to back down, to quietly drain the water, smash the concrete, and erase years of family memories. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized compliance wasn't an option. If they wanted to play games with rules and technicalities, then I would play too, but on my own terms. I began digging deeper into the HOA's bylaws. Hours of reading revealed something fascinating. While swimming pools weren't specifically addressed, ornamental ponds and natural water features were permitted, provided they were maintained and added aesthetic value to the neighborhood. The clause was buried in a section most people probably skimmed over, but for me, it was like striking gold. The HOA wanted my pool gone, but nowhere did it say I couldn't have a pond. The idea started small, just a passing thought of converting one into the other. But the more I mulled it over, the more appealing it became. I didn't have to destroy the pool. I could transform it. Instead of a lifeless hole in the ground, I could create something beautiful, functional, and perfectly within the HOA's rules. And if I did it right, not only would they be powerless to stop me, but they'd be forced to accept it as a community improvement. With the seed planted, my imagination ran wild. I pictured lush greenery surrounding the edges, koi fish darting through the water, and lily pads floating gently on the surface. I imagined stone walkways, a small wooden bridge, and maybe even a fountain powered by solar panels. My plain backyard pool could become a sanctuary, a feature so impressive that it would outshine every manicured lawn in the subdivision. The more I thought about it, the more delicious the irony became. The HOA wanted the pool gone because they claimed it clashed with their precious aesthetics. Fine. I would replace it with something they couldn't possibly object to. A centerpiece so striking that their own rulebook would protect it. They'd demanded destruction, but what they'd get instead was creation. Over the next few days, I quietly began planning. I sketched designs, researched pond construction, and calculated costs. To my surprise, it wasn't nearly as expensive as I feared. With some elbow grease and creative thinking, I could make it happen. Of course, I didn't share my plan with anyone. The fewer people who knew, the less chance word would get back to the HOA before I was ready. As the deadline on the letter crept closer, I felt less like a victim and more like a strategist. Each day that passed fueled my determination. I wasn't just complying, I was evolving. And when the board members finally came to check on their victory, they would find something entirely unexpected waiting for them. The countdown to the HOA's inspection had begun, but instead of preparing for defeat, I was preparing for my masterpiece. The transformation begins. The backyard became my private construction zone. Every morning before work and every evening after dinner, I dedicated hours to the project. The first step was draining the pool. As the water level sank lower and lower, I felt like I was erasing the old and preparing the canvas for something new. To anyone else, it looked like I was following the HOA's orders. To me, it was the opening move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. Once the pool was empty, I scrubbed it clean and began reimagining its shape. I hauled in bags of soil, rocks, and gravel, filling in the shallow and to create gradual slopes that mimicked a natural shoreline. At the deep end, I planned to leave a basin, perfect for fish and aquatic plants. The concrete walls that once screamed swimming pool slowly vanished under layers of earth, stone, and texture. Bit by bit, it began to look less like something you swam in and more like something carved out by nature itself. Neighbors started to notice. At first, they assumed I was tearing it out, complying with the HOA's order like everyone else would have. Some even offered sympathetic nods from across the fence. But as the days passed, curiosity replaced sympathy. They saw me hauling in plants, arranging boulders, and building small wooden structures. It didn't look like demolition, it looked like creation. One evening, I installed a small pump system to circulate the water. When I turned it on for the first time, a gentle trickle echoed across the yard, transforming the silence into something soothing and alive. By the end of the week, lily pads floated where chlorine once swirled. The sterile blue concrete had given way to earthy tones and vibrant greenery. The pool wasn't gone, it had been reborn. Of course, I wasn't just building a pond for myself. Every choice I made was calculated with the HOA in mind. I added ornamental plants listed in the community's own landscaping guidebook. I positioned decorative rocks and lanterns that aligned with approved outdoor features. I even printed and highlighted the exact clause from the bylaws that allowed natural ponds, so there would be no ambiguity when the inevitable confrontation arrived. This wasn't reckless rebellion, it was rule-abiding revenge. By the end of 2 weeks, the transformation was undeniable. Fish swam lazily beneath the surface. Frogs croaked at night. Dragonflies danced across the water in the morning sun. What was once a plain suburban pool had become a thriving ecosystem, alive in ways the HOA could never have anticipated. But while most neighbors marveled, I knew the HOA wouldn't. To them, this wasn't creativity, it was defiance. And when word reached the president that my removed pool had instead blossomed into a pond, she wouldn't see beauty. She would see challenge. And sure enough, a new letter arrived in my mailbox just as the pond began to hit its stride. The HOA strikes back. The letter arrived just as I expected, thin, crisp, and brimming with self-importance. This time, the language was sharper, almost frantic. The HOA accused me of circumventing community regulations and claimed that my so-called pond was nothing more than a disguised swimming pool. They demanded its removal within 15 days, threatening even steeper fines if I refused to comply. Reading it, I couldn't help but smile. They were rattled. My plan had worked exactly as intended. I had followed their rules, and they hated it. Every plant, every rock, every pump had been carefully chosen to stay within the bylaws. And now the HOA was caught in a trap of their own making. Still, their desperation was dangerous. Within days, the HOA president herself appeared at my doorstep, clipboard in hand, strutting with the confidence of someone who believed her word was absolute. She peered over the fence, expecting to see a violation she could easily condemn. Instead, she found a tranquil pond alive with koi fish, shaded by carefully arranged lilies, and framed by approved landscaping plants. Her expression soured instantly. The next board meeting became the talk of the neighborhood. Residents whispered about how much time the HOA spent debating my backyard. Some said the president demanded an emergency vote to rewrite the bylaws. Others claimed she suggested hiring an inspector to prove my pond was illegal. Whatever the case, it was clear my project had become her personal obsession. Neighbors began to take sides. Some admired my creativity and resilience, openly praising how I had turned the pool into something extraordinary. They said it added beauty to the block, that it made the neighborhood feel alive. But others, loyal to the HOA or simply wary of conflict, muttered about me causing trouble and making things harder for everyone. The air grew tense, as if my pond had split the community into two factions. The HOA, meanwhile, escalated their tactics. Another notice arrived, this one citing safety hazards. They claimed the pond could attract pests, endanger children, and disrupt property values. Yet every point they raised crumbled under scrutiny. I had mosquito control in place, safety fencing around the yard, and water quality measures better than most public parks. Their arguments weren't rooted in fact, they were rooted in spite. But the pressure was mounting. Each new letter carried harsher threats, including the possibility of legal action. It was clear the HOA wasn't going to back down quietly. They had made my pond their battlefield, and the president her personal war. What she didn't know, though, was that I wasn't done fighting. I had kept my strongest card hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. The HOA believed they could intimidate me with fines and threats. But I had the law on my side, and soon I would make that crystal clear. The next chapter of this battle wouldn't be fought with rocks and lilies. It would be fought with paperwork and loopholes. The legal card. The HOA thought they had worn me down. Every week, a new letter arrived with increasingly desperate accusations. They accused me of creating a nuisance, of lowering property values, even of violating community spirit. Each claim was thinner than the last, a web of excuses spun by a board that couldn't admit they had lost. But what they didn't realize was that while they were busy piling threats onto my doorstep, I was quietly building a defense so airtight they'd choke on their own rules. For weeks, I gathered evidence. I documented every step of the pond's construction, from the draining of the pool to the planting of each approved ornamental shrub. I took photos of the mosquito treatments, kept receipts for every fish and water plant, and even filed for a small wildlife permit to cover myself legally. What they thought was rebellion was, in fact, the most compliant project in the neighborhood. My pond wasn't a loophole. It was a masterstroke of following the letter of the law. The turning point came when I sat down with a lawyer. I laid out everything. The letters, the threats, the bylaws, the evidence. After reading through it all, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. "They don't have a case," he said. "In fact, if they keep harassing you, they could be in violation of state homeowner protection laws. We can make this very uncomfortable for them." That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. The HOA had power, yes, but their power was limited by their own rules and by the law itself. They thrived on intimidation, on homeowners who didn't know their rights. But I wasn't just another intimidated resident. I had the facts, the paperwork, and now legal backing. The lawyer drafted a formal response, sharp, professional, and devastatingly precise. It pointed out the exact bylaw that permitted ornamental ponds. It listed every safety measure I had taken, each one exceeding community requirements. And most importantly, it cited state statutes protecting homeowners from unfair enforcement and selective targeting. If the HOA continued their campaign, they wouldn't just lose, they'd open themselves up to lawsuits, damages, and public humiliation. When I mailed that letter back, I didn't just feel relief. I felt vindicated. For the first time, I wasn't just defending my pond. I was going on the offensive. The HOA wanted me to cower under their authority, but now they were the ones cornered. They could push forward and risk a legal battle they couldn't win, or they could back off and save themselves the embarrassment. In the days that followed, something changed. The letters stopped arriving as quickly. The HOA president, once so bold in her crusade, grew quieter at meetings. Whispers spread that the board had been advised not to pursue the matter further. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the pressure lift. But I wasn't celebrating just yet. The fight wasn't officially over until they admitted defeat. And that final moment of victory was just around the corner. The sweetest victory. By the time the dust settled, the neighborhood no longer saw a battle over a backyard water feature. They saw a symbol of resistance. What began as a petty demand from the HOA to remove my pool had grown into a full-blown war of wills, and everyone knew who had won. After weeks of threats, notices, and board meetings that went nowhere, the HOA had exhausted every angle of attack. Their claims of safety hazards, pest risks, and aesthetic violations had all collapsed under evidence. Each time they tried to corner me, I responded with documentation, photographs, and references pulled straight from their own bylaws. They were playing checkers while I was playing chess. The final blow came when my attorney sent a carefully crafted letter reminding the HOA of state statutes that explicitly protected homeowners' rights to natural water features if they were safe and properly maintained. It spelled out the legal consequences for harassment, misuse of fines, and targeting individual homeowners without cause. The board, already stretched thin from backlash in the community, realized they had no path forward. They could fight me and lose in court, or they could back down quietly and save face. They chose silence. The letters stopped arriving. The threats evaporated. And in the absence of their noise, my pond flourished. The water shimmered under the sun, lilies spread across its surface, and koi fish swam lazily in the deep end that once echoed with chlorine. At night, solar lanterns cast gentle glows along the rocks, turning the backyard into a sanctuary that no one, not even the most determined HOA president, could take away. What surprised me most was how the neighbors responded. Many who had once kept quiet began stopping by to admire the pond. Some asked for advice on building their own. The same people who once whispered about me being a troublemaker now saw me as the one who stood up to the board. Even those who had sided with the HOA started to admit, grudgingly, that the pond was beautiful, unique, and undeniably an improvement over what had been there before. As for the HOA president, her reign of control never quite recovered. Whispers of favoritism, misuse of power, and personal vendettas followed her after the ordeal. Attendance at meetings dwindled, support from residents faltered, and eventually, she stepped down from her position. Her attempt to crush me had, in the end, crushed her credibility. Looking back, the irony still makes me laugh. They demanded I remove my pool to protect aesthetics. Instead, they got a backyard pond that became the crown jewel of the neighborhood. They tried to bully me with threats, but in the end, they exposed their own weakness. The HOA had wanted victory. What they got instead was defeat disguised as beauty, written across the surface of a pond they could never touch. And as the koi glided beneath the water's surface, I realized the sweetest revenge wasn't just winning. It was turning their demand for destruction into a triumph of creation.